everybody, and welcome back to another week of the Let's Talk Social Innovation podcast. I hope you've had an amazing start to your week, but if not, we can kickstart that right here. I'm your host, Ian Kahinde, and y'all, usually we do the bulletin board, but as this is the final episode of the semester, no bulletin board, no events as y'all are all out on summer break, hopefully living it up and enjoying everything that comes with it. This week, for the final episode of the Let's Talk Social Innovation podcast, I'm very excited to have on the incredible Dean Nicola Foote. How are you feeling today?
I'm feeling great. It is such a privilege to be here, and thank you, Ian, for inviting me.
Again, this episode's been in the works for the entire semester, actually. Something that a lot of our watchers will notice is that for the second half of this week's episode, we will be clipping some earlier footage that we had from earlier in the semester. There are a lot of moving parts in this whole thing that made it so that this was a necessity. But regardless, it's a great conversation I'm sure everybody will enjoy. So Dean Foote is the dean of the David C. Frederick Honors College and a Burtis L. and Morton S. Lerner Chair in Honors Education at the University of Pittsburgh. Dean Foote is also a professor in the School of Public and International Affairs. Again, all of the hats that we always go through on every episode for every single one of our guests. Absolutely incredible. For this week's episode, we'll be getting into the dean's backstory, the things that made her the person that she is today. We'll have our artist spotlight as always, and in the second half, we'll have a conversation about honors education. But everything else aside, Dean Foote, take me from the beginning.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Ian. Well, I grew up in England. I think it's still just about evident in my accent, right? So I'm originally from Manchester, which is the second city of England. That's where I was born, but moved at the age of 9 to rural Leicestershire. So, that was a very interesting experience growing up in the countryside of England, and in particular with regards to schooling, because the elementary school that I went to had literally 50 students total.
Wow.
Across all the years. So that was, a very intimate community. And, something that I always reflect on a lot is that out of that, so in my year group, there were 8 of us, I guess, and I'm literally the only one that went on to college out of that village environment. So it's something I always reflect on, how privileged I am that I was able to continue into higher education. And so growing up in Leicestershire, I think there were some parallels with rural Pennsylvania, actually. When I moved there, it was shortly after the mines had been closed down. So there was a lot of sort of economic hardship in that area growing up, which really did feed into the educational environment. And so I went to middle school in we would all the different villages would travel on school buses to the nearest town. So I went to middle school in Ibstock, where that was really quite a deprived area at the time. And then for high school, went to Ashby Grammar School, which was in a different type of environment. And I think that was an important piece of my journey, because through that schooling, there were a lot more opportunities. And that ended with me going on to college in London. And I guess we can talk about that a little bit if you're interested in, or if you have any additional questions you want to ask about rural education. I'm all yours.
So one thing that I did catch you saying was that you were one of the few people from your community to go on to university.
Yeah.
How does it feel, I guess, having the community on your back, being one of the few people to go abroad and, I guess, spread that?
Right, absolutely. I mean, I do recognize how extraordinarily privileged I am, right? Because I am certainly not any smarter than any of those incredible people that I went to school with, but just was able to have, opportunities. I was always a good test taker, and the British education system is all about, can you handle the pressure of an exam at the end of the year where everything comes down to how do you do on that day? And I always actually enjoyed exams, which makes me a little bit unusual. I loved the adrenaline you get and all the ideas come flying out on the day. So I could flourish in that system, but that isn't true for everyone, right? It's a very high stakes environment. And I was also the first person in my family to go to college as well. So both of my parents left school at 16, which is very common in England. You take school leaving exams at 16, and only a relatively small percentage carry on until 18 and complete high school. So I was the first to even do that. and then going to college, I think the other thing to highlight about that type of experience, if you're the first one, is there are a lot of things that you don't know, and you don't know that you don't know them. So I made my choice of university really just based on where did I want to be. I didn't know a lot about the differences in institution type, and I knew I really wanted to get to a big city, and I wanted to get to London. So that's how I ended up applying to UCL, which happens to be one of the absolute top universities in the UK. But honestly, I didn't really understand that or know the difference that could make. So again, I feel very, very lucky that that I was able to have that experience.
So, speaking back to that theme of community, when's the last time that you were in England?
I was there fairly recently, actually. So I got to go back just before Christmas, actually for David C. Frederick Honors business. We have an emerging partnership with University College, Oxford, through the David Frederick naming gift, actually, because he's an alumni of both institutions. As Pitt's first Rhodes Scholar, that UNIV is where he did his Rhodes-funded doctoral study. And so we got to go and tour the residential facilities that David Frederick is funding in Oxford, have some meetings, and we also had a celebration for the 30th anniversary of the Pitt and London Film School. That was very exciting. So I got to add on a couple of family days as well, which was really nice. And it is always, I don't get to go back to England as often as I would like. Typically, I go about once a year. So it's very nice when I had this opportunity to represent Frederick and be on home turf. That was very special.
What was it like seeing your family?
Oh, it's always great, yeah. And it's very interesting how much my village has changed in the last few years, because I told you how growing up that area was somewhat deprived because of the recent mine closures. And what's happened over the last decade or so is that there was a lot of government investment in the national forest. So they planted trees over the former mine areas and embedded it into the national forest. And the area I grew up from is just down the road from Sherwood Forest, right? Robin Hood, all of that. So it all merges in with those historic forests. And so that has sort of really changed the economic landscape. And the other big thing that's happened is as the commuter belt for London really expands outwards, there are people now buying homes in the village who commute into London, which is kind of mind-blowing for me in a way, because growing up, and especially when I went to college in London, that was seen as really far away, really different. And now there are people who, because of the rise of sort of hybrid work schedules, twice a week they go down to London, and it's a doable commute for them. So it really has changed the nature of the village. There are, £1 million houses in this small village now, which is Yeah, something very different to what I grew up with. So it's kind of fascinating to go back and to see that.
The combination of urban sprawl and remote work, those two things together, just absolutely fascinating to look at.
Right, and the shift, so we're seeing it here in our community, right? And then seeing it 3,000 miles away, another version of that, and how that impacts things like rural urban divides as the boundaries start to become a bit more fluid, I think is very interesting.
So, speaking of being 3,000 miles away, what brought you across the pond from the UK to the US?
Yeah, well, I think the answer to that is sort of rooted in my choice of subject in a way. I majored essentially in Latin American history. My PhD was on the history of Ecuador in the early 20th century. And um, and that is not a commonly taught field in the UK. Most history departments will have, for their non-British, non-European history, they'll have historians who work on the former British Empire, right? So there's a lot of work on South Asia, Africa, but very few institutions offer Latin American history. And so we were always sort of made aware as part of our cohort of doctoral students that it might be important to broaden our net and look and look outside of the UK when it came time for us to look for jobs. So I always had that in the back of my mind. But what really I think brought me on this path was that I met my husband, who is American, and so that actually happened. One of my best friends from my undergraduate degree had done a year abroad at the University of Texas as part of her bachelor's. She met a Texan, was getting married to him, and so she was based in Austin, Texas. And meanwhile, I'm a doctoral student, and the very best library collection in the world for Latin American studies, bar none, is the Nettie Lee Benson Library at the University of Texas at Austin, and it's my literal favorite place in the world. And so I came to do some research there on my way to go to Ecuador for field work. And at the time, Carlos, my now husband, was her roommate. So that's how we met. And yeah, so then the combination of there might be more jobs in the US, and you've met a really wonderful American who ultimately became my husband. That's what put me on that path.
So, coming from the UK to the US, were there any major elements of culture shock?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that in some ways those are surprising, right? Because we share a common language, and obviously American culture is so dominant globally, right? That I think certainly anyone coming from England to the US feels familiar, right? You've watched lots of movies and films, so you feel like you know. But there still are some really interesting differences. One of the really big ones for me was car dependency, because I didn't learn to drive until I was 34, long after I was in the US. And I just didn't think that would be a problem, right? I'd been in London at that point for 10 years, where everyone takes public transit. It's like New York, where actually relatively few people drive. And so when I moved to Florida, it didn't really occur to me that I would need to drive.
Completely different ends of the spectrum.
Completely different. So for my first couple of years, I was riding the bus to work, and it was truly an ordeal. It would literally take an hour and a half. I had to get 3 buses, and I would often be the only one at the bus stop. I'm riding these sort of ghost buses, and it was really baffling to me why other people thought it was strange that I was on the bus. That was one of the big differences, and I finally did have to give in and learn to drive. And now that's a fun part of the American experience, right? Road trips.
We all love our cars.
Exactly. But it does give you a real sense of freedom, right? Here you can just drive anywhere, right? You can keep going. It's so easy. So, but that was definitely a big difference. And even smaller things like the UK has a very strong culture of self-depreciation. You are not supposed to. It is actually almost a taboo to sort of promote yourself, and so you always are supposed to underplay what you're doing. And it took me a long time to realize that actually doesn't go down well in the US. So I would say things like, oh my God, I was so unprepared for class today. But people would really take that seriously and think, is she preparing? And yes, but in the UK culture, you're supposed to act like, oh, you're just doing things by the seat of your pants, right? Essentially. And so learning, nope, that is not the way. And actually, you really do need to promote yourself. You have to own your accomplishments, and that's a good thing, right? In the UK, it would be really frowned upon, right? I walk around a lot at Pitt going, and we were just named the number 11 honors college in the nation. And if we're in the UK, I could not do that. That would be really embarrassing. And so now I actually really love this about American culture.
How we wear everything on our sleeve.
Exactly, and we can claim our successes. It's a beautiful thing, right? And you can be open about your realities. So definitely some differences, but yeah, adapting to them over time.
So I guess building off that theme of global citizenship, one of the major formative events in your life was your study abroad experience in the West Indies. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this was so life-changing for me, and it's a big reason why I'm such an enormous advocate of study abroad and study away programs for our students in the Honors College. I fell in love with Caribbean history as an undergrad. I took a course, and it just completely changed my outlook on life. And so I applied to, I was in a bachelor's degree in history of the Americas, and I'd chosen that very specifically so that I could work on Latin American and Caribbean history, and also because it included a year abroad. But I really wanted to go to Colombia, and then that wasn't an option the year that I was doing my study abroad because of the political challenges in Colombia at that time. And so the options that we were given was Texas, where my friend went, and I'm so glad she did, because that led to good things for me personally. And then the University of the West Indies in St. Augustine. So that's where I went, and it was absolutely life-changing in all the best ways. I think it was such a rich opportunity to immerse in a culture at the same time as you're learning the history of that region, right? It was to see those intersections between what I'm learning about in the classroom, what I'm seeing, in my day-to-day world and life, was just truly profound as a learning experience. And it has really powered, decades of passion for Caribbean history. I later ended up writing a textbook on Caribbean history, the Caribbean History Reader, and that really all came from that year abroad, and really the way in which it opened up my understanding about history in general, and the ways in which sometimes areas or themes that are thought of as niche are actually really, really critical and open up a different perspective. So that's certainly what happened to me. And then Trinidad is just one of the most amazing places. I still have really close friends from that year abroad, that are literally like sisters to me. One of the probably the most exciting experiences that I had, that again has stayed with my work and what I've tried to pay forward in experiences I've created for honors students, is the experience of Carnival. I mean, there's nothing like that in England, certainly. And often, outside, there's often a perception that Carnival is just a party, right? And yes, there's certainly elements, but there's so much more. And the richness of the culture, the uniqueness, this, the steel pan that came out of oil drums, right, and the beginning of oil exploration in Trinidad at the beginning of the 20th century, and then the way in which that's now sort of so central to cultural identity. I also had the chance to go to calypso tents, and now one of the things that I work on that I find so much joy and meaning in is the history of calypso, and I work frequently with several calypso monarchs, and have sort of now over several decades have had that connection. So I think that this opportunity to be part of something so collective and to be welcomed into that was extremely life-changing for me. And as I said, has really fed into my own commitment to study abroad and global learning for students.
If I could go to Carnival in Trinidad, it would probably be a core memory for me as well.
Absolutely. Well, we will try and make it happen for you, Ian. We're actually working on some study abroad options themed around the carnival arts in Trinidad.
It's very exciting.
We will do our best to make that happen.
So moving forward towards your professional career, what made you want to become a dean?
Well, that's actually a brilliant question, Ian. I'm not sure that I ever explicitly wanted to. This sort of happened a little bit more organically. And in fact, in some ways still takes me by surprise, right? That this is, I feel incredibly lucky to be in this role, but it happened a little serendipitously. So I always knew growing up that I wanted to be a teacher. That was always something very important to me. And teaching was where I initially sort of found my passion in higher ed. And I think how I came on the path to be a dean was linked to the institution that I first worked at. So when I moved to the US, I didn't know anything about American higher ed, right? I didn't know about different institution types and research intensive versus regional comprehensives and things like that. So I'd actually applied to quite a lot of jobs in the US, and I had a few different offers. And I also had one in the UK, but chose to come, and I took a job at Florida Gulf Coast University, which at the time was the newest university in the United States. It was only 7 years old when I started there. And I didn't really understand what that meant in difference, but the big thing that it did mean for me was that programs were being built and expanded in a very rapid and accelerated way. And so right from the beginning of my career as an assistant professor, I had the opportunity to take on leadership roles that I wouldn't typically have done, right? Typically, assistant professors are supposed to do their research and teach and not really engage in university level service and leadership. But because we were such a new institution, it was sort of all hands on deck. And I discovered, so I think my second year, became the founding director of the master's degree in history, and discovered that, wow, I really enjoyed building and creating opportunities for others through academic programs. And that was something I wouldn't have anticipated for myself. The other thing that happened was I discovered honors education. And so honors doesn't exist in the UK. And when I started at FGCU, the honors program was really small. It was about 50 students and very new. But I got very quickly connected through these amazing students who were in my classes asking me, can I do some additional work? And I was like, wow, here are students that want to go above and beyond and explicitly, right, in a way that wouldn't be normal in England, saying, let me do more. I want to be the absolute standout student here. And being able to work with them, get them launched on research, I came to fall in love with honors. So for a while I became director of the honors program at FGCU, helped transition that to an honors college. A lot of growth happened. I was a department chair for a while. So again, sort of building leadership experience, and then became associate dean for undergrad studies. And this is over like a 10-year period in which I'm also working through the faculty ranks. And that was the point, I think, where I got a little bit more intentional. I realized, okay, I'm in this senior leadership role that I sort of feel a bit like, well, I came to this a little bit accidentally, but I'm recognizing this is really important work. I'm finding meaning in it. But now if this is what I'm going to do, what I really want to work on is honors education. So as Associate Dean for Undergraduate Studies, honors was part of my portfolio and lots of other things as well. But I realized where my passion is honors. So an opportunity opened at Arizona State at Barrett the Honors College, which is a legendarily brilliant honors college. And I interviewed and was mind blown when I was given that opportunity to be there. It was literally a dream come true. And the dean of the Honors College, Mark Jacobs, he's often referred to as the Michael Jordan of honors. He is just a legendary figure, and I worked directly under him, learned so much. It was truly, truly amazing. And then this position opened at Pitt, and again I thought, well, I'm not going to get hired for that. So prestigious, so important, but I need to try. I'm going to send my materials in, and then here I am. So I feel incredibly lucky, and we've been able to do some amazing things over the 4 years that I've been here.
Very much so. So the last question that I want to ask before we hit this week's Artist Spotlight, as I ask every single person, what is the greatest life advice you could pass on to the people watching and listening?
Well, I think the key thing is to be open to different possibilities. I think that, especially for our honors students, so many of you come in, with very much, this is where I'm going, and here's my checklist of things that I must do. And I love that. That is very important. But I think it's also equally important to be open to opportunities. And to follow doors that open that you might not have seen yourself walking through, but to see what feels right, because you will probably find strengths that you didn't know that you had. The other thing that I would say is to really follow what you're passionate about and what finds you joy and what brings you joy and meaning. It is so important that you're not living your life by what other people see as prestigious or impactful, but you're really focused on what you uniquely care about and can contribute to. I think that is where ultimate success comes from. So that's my biggest piece of advice.
Definitely taking that to heart. I think that the journey to finding true joy internally is a lifelong one and a very important one.
Absolutely.
So getting into this week's Artist Spotlight, our final Artist Spotlight of this semester, we'll be playing the song Same by Quarter Zip. I hope that you'll enjoy. Now, getting into the second portion of this week's episode, we're going to be talking about equity and honors education. Dean Foote has a very unique perspective in terms of honors lifestyle. As she has alluded to, she is a first-generation college student acting as dean. How does that impact your decision-making as dean in making life better for your students?
Well, I think that is a really important question, and I think it does in some pretty profound ways. And I think my experience as a first generation student was probably similar to many of our students, that you don't really realize you're at a disadvantage, right? Because you're smart, you're doing classes, you're succeeding, but there are certain things that students who are not first generation know and can ask for that you don't know about. And so I feel like in my own experience, I was very lucky that in my cohort, I was with some students from extremely elite backgrounds, right? I was at UCL, one of the most selective and prestigious institutions. And so when they would say, and now I'm applying to this thing, I would think, well, wait, I do better in my essays. I should be, if you are, I should be applying. If you're qualified, so am I. So then I would apply and then I would get it. So things sort of, happened organically. So as dean, what I really think about is it's so important to be explicit and transparent about how everything works, about what resources are available, to really, really share those. And then we're always thinking about what are the types of disadvantages and invisible barriers that might be there for students, right? And some of that was very first gen related, right? And I didn't know that and couldn't articulate it. But even when I had to travel by train to interview, the timing of when interviews happen and things like that in the academic year, it's almost at the end of, so the way you get even your student loan money in the UK is it all comes once at the beginning of the year. And so by the time that you're almost at the end of the year and doing interviews, there's not much left, right, if that's all you have. And so I remember it was really challenging to buy the train ticket. Then I had an absolute fiasco because I was so nervous, and I had to also buy a suit to interview, and that was a whole stress. And then I had an absolute fiasco on the train down to interview, and I left my train ticket on the train going out. So when I came back, I then had to buy another ticket, but I didn't have the money.
All these things add up.
I literally didn't have the money. And I literally was crying on an assistant at the thing, where I'm interviewing. And she gave me £5, I remember that, to get me a taxi there was the whole thing. And so now, as dean, I think about, okay, so we clearly need a fund that if students are interviewing, that we can cover those costs, right? That we have an emergency fund for if you lose your train ticket or the equivalent of that, we can help you figure that out and replace that. That we, we just opened the interview closet on 37, and I'm really excited about that, right? Because I remember the stress of, and especially for me, right, as a college student, my clothes were definitely not interview appropriate because I would get my going out clothes were my main clothes, right? So I would go to the library in skirts and heels because those were my outfits, right? But they were not interview outfits, right? So yeah, always trying to think about those things. And I think more broadly, what motivates me, the reason that I am in honors and feel so privileged to have this role, is that I truly believe that honors education is itself, it is about social equity, right? What it does by design and what makes me so passionate about it is creating the same set of intellectual experiences that you would have in an elite liberal arts college and pay enormous sums of money for. That becomes accessible in a public environment, and it becomes accessible to more students, right? Many of those elite liberal arts are very generous in scholarshiping, but they only have tiny cohorts entering, right? So we have much larger numbers of students. We're able to support them and give them the same educational experience. And so that's always what I'm checking with myself. Are we providing the best educational experience? And are we making that accessible to all students who can benefit from it, right? And if we're not, and sometimes that is the case, right, then we need to look at policy. We need to find ways to address whatever those barriers are and work through them.
I think that's an excellent perspective that I never truly took into account, of making an experience that's similar to that of a high liberal arts school or a high Ivy, and bringing that experience at a more affordable rate. And
Absolutely.
with the programs that the Honors College has been building up, one of my favorite phrases is that a rising tide raises all ships.
Absolutely.
So when our underserved population does better, it truly helps everybody to equal the playing field.
Exactly. And we need everyone's perspective and leadership, right? I'm making decisions slightly differently because I have a slightly different background, right? But that's beneficial, right? Those are, and so I think that is also what makes honors so important, right? It helps us expand the range of voices and perspectives that are out in leadership in every sector of society, right? And if you look at our alumni, they're out everywhere
Doing great things.
Doing extraordinary things. And our current students, you're at the UN, you're changing the world. So
Now, before we get out of here, is there anything else you'd want to get across to the people watching and listening?
Well, I think I'm just very grateful for the opportunity to be here today, and grateful to serve in this role, and excited to see what even greater things that we can achieve together as a community.
Well, it's been great having you on. I'm very appreciative of your time. It's been a crazy time for everybody as of late, but I'm glad we were able to do this episode. I'm glad we were able to put something great together for the audience. For everybody who's watching and listening, all things FHC will be in the description below, so you can be acclimated to, I don't know what I was trying to say there, so I'll just keep moving on. But anyways, this is your host, Ian Kahende. This has been an amazing episode with Dean Foote of the Frederick Honors College, and we are wishing you an amazing week. Peace out, y'all.